The next principle is where we're really going to answer the question of what's so wrong with more centralized power, with power and authority flowing to Washington, D.C., than what the founders had originally intended. So, as a general principle and as a general rule, power tends to want to centralize. Power tends to have a gravitational pull towards other power. And central governments tend to want to amass more and more power. The founding fathers, I mentioned this before, looked to the peoples of the Anglo-Saxons. These are the ancient Englishmen who became kind of their model for strong local self-government. And that, their population was small enough that, and the Anglo-Saxons were kind of broken down into tribes, and each tribe held their own tribal meetings where each person had a say and had a vote in what was going to happen in their tribe. And the founding fathers really liked this idea of people being able to control things that are closest to them. Now, in the United States of America, we don't participate in government the same way that the Anglo-Saxons did. The Anglo-Saxons were more of a democracy where these small groups, these small tribes would come together and they would all individually cast a vote. And we elect representatives to go and do that work on our behalf. So that's the difference between a republic and a democracy. In a democracy, you pass the laws and you vote directly on the laws. In a republic, we elect our representatives, and then they go and discuss and pass laws. And in many states, like in Arizona, there are processes where you can refer a law to the ballot where people can go vote on it directly. So that's kind of a remnant of this democratic way of doing things. But for the most part, most laws that are passed are done through our representatives. In England, back in those ancient days, local municipalities handled their own problems. They replaced their own members when a vacancy came in a particular public office. And in fact, it was that foundation of self-government and of being able to control things on a local level that was in place even during the time of the American Revolution. This is why the early colonists had their own local governments. They elected their own leaders. And that was one of the things that in the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers and Thomas Jefferson pointed out was kind of a grievance that they had against King George III. As Englishmen, they had the right to elect and appoint their own local leaders. And that tradition dated back to the Anglo-Saxons. And the crown had been depriving them of that by appointing his own leaders for them. Thomas Jefferson said, "The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to every one exactly the functions he is competent to perform best. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations, the state governments with the civil rights, laws, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally, the counties with the local concerns of the counties, and each township direct the interests within itself. What has destroyed liberty and rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body." So Thomas Jefferson's looking throughout history and seeing these great examples of experiments in democracy and republicanism. And what does he see as the main thing that led to their downfall? It was bringing too much authority into the central government. We see this with Rome. For a long time, Rome was a republic and was very much reliant on local governance. And it wasn't too long after it had consolidated into an empire with just an enormous amount of authority residing in Rome and with the emperor that they began to lose touch, that they began to lose their grip and eventually collapsed under the weight of this bloated central government. James Madison said in Federalist Paper number 45, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. So this goes back and is strongly related with the principle that we talked about last week of the importance of limiting the authority and powers of a federal government. And one of the main reasons why they wanted to do that was to preserve most of the authority, most of the decision making at the local level. Who knows best what the people in Tucson or in Salt Lake or in St. George, Utah, or in Washington, D.C., or in Seattle, Washington? Who knows best? What's best for the people in those areas? It's the people in those areas and those who they elect. Who knows best what's going to make Kansas the most successful? It's the people who live in Kansas, who know the climate, who know the soil, who know what it's capable of. This is the whole idea, is give people the authority to act in those areas that they have the greatest expertise. It is simply plain hubris to think that any one person or any small group of people located hundreds or thousands of miles away can possibly know what's best for every single person, every single climate, every single culture, every single belief system. And anybody who thinks that a centralized body is capable of all of that need only look to the experiments in communism that have failed so miserably. And now you might say, well, there's still, the Iron Curtain fell. The USSR fell, and there have been bloody ends to communism, but China's still kicking. Yeah. And how well has that government done at preserving the life, liberty, and the ability of its people to pursue happiness? Thomas Jefferson went on to say, let the general government, and back then they used the word general government to refer to the federal government. It's the government that is over the country generally. Let the general government be reduced to foreign concerns only, and our general government may be reduced to a very simple organization and a very inexpensive one. A few plain duties to be performed by a few servants. When you look at the responsibilities that the federal government actually has in the Constitution, becomes very obvious that much of what it's dabbling in, much of what it's doing today is outside the scope of the Constitution. We've talked about this before, none of the welfare programs are within scope. The Department of Education is not a part of anything that the federal government has any business dealing in, at least according to the Constitution. So it seems weird to us to hear, a former president talk about the federal government being a simple organization and an inexpensive organization, especially with the massive amounts of debt that our federal government is incurring today. But this is how they viewed it back then. In fact, in the Constitution itself, it requires Congress to meet once per year. And during the debates in the Constitutional Convention, many were worried about requiring the federal government to meet so frequently, because they thought that because they had limited the federal government so severely that they wouldn't have enough to do if they met once per year. That was too often to meet once a year for a short amount of time for one short session. They'd just be bored, and we'd be requiring these people to travel hundreds of miles to come for this meeting, only to realize, hey, we got nothing to do. You guys can head on back now. They were genuinely worried about that. And now we have a Congress that is in session year-round, is not simple or inexpensive. And the reason for that is this shift. This power has shifted from the state level to the federal level. And it is not making our education system any more efficient. It's not making our economy any more efficient. The insanely rapid growth and prosperity that we are experiencing has slowed significantly since this shift happened. And it's no great secret why that is. We've got more central bureaucrats trying to make decisions for people that live in situations and in climates that and in parts of the country that they know nothing about. This is a principle that we desperately, desperately need to regain if we're to preserve our freedoms and if we are to get back to being that shining city on a hill that our founding fathers and that God Himself wishes this country to be.